Hello humans, it's just Martine, and today I'm going to bring you behind the scenes and talk about what it's actually like reading for an episode of TBR Crime. It's a weekend morning, I'm in sweatpants, sweatshirt, got my book blanket, it's got a bunch of bookish sayings on it, and so I'm ready to talk about books. If you're unfamiliar, TBR Crime is my TBR game. I do it a little differently than I would say most traditional TBR games. Usually when people play a TBR game, they play it, they get books, and they're supposed to read those books throughout the month. In my TBR game, I get the prompts and I review the books all in the same video. I created TBR Crime last year and started doing it as a bi-monthly thing this year, where I get 2 months to solve a case, which involves however many prompts the board decides to give me. I wanted to talk about the actual process of reading for those videos, especially this most recent episode, because she was a doozy, an absolute, like, what the heck happened with that? That was my biggest episode to date. Who knows if it will be my biggest episode ever, but it's certainly going to be one for the record books, because I had 2 months to read 16 books for just this one video. Now, originally, I tried to do this same video, but just strictly vlog style, but that didn't really work out because it's basically just me saying, and one of them finished 4 of these books, 5 books done at this point, halfway through. Still have 5 books to read for this. I just finished my last book, and let's be honest with ourselves, the best part of that montage was watching my hair grow out. So I'm taking you behind the scenes for the September-October round. That means that I played the game like a week or so before September and started picking out books. I didn't start reading until September 1st. I actually started September 2nd, and I had all the way up until October 31st to finish reading. If I had not managed to finish reading those 2 months, it would have become a cold case, which would have been unfortunate because we would have lost all of our cool points from the year so far. And trust me when I say I'm gonna need those in a little bit. So theoretically, I have 2 months to read for each episode. Given my reading pace should not be bad even when we have a 16-book episode. But the problem is that this is not the only piece of content that I produce in those 2 months, meaning it is not the only content I need to read for in those 2 months. And in fact, for the first portion of those 2 months, this was not even my priority. My main priority right now is finishing Kindle Clear Out. Kindle Clear Out is a vlog series I produce every other month, so if TBR Crime happens one month, Kindle Clear Out typically happens the next. And I would say each of those episodes gets produced most strongly in the month it's supposed to come out. So I was aiming to get a Kindle Clear Out episode out in September, and then the TBR Crime episode out either by the end of October or just slightly after the end of October. That meant that my priority in September was Kindle Clear Out, and my priority later became TBR Crime once we were closer to the release date for that video. Now, especially because there were so many books in this episode, I did try to make sure that I was always currently reading at least one book for the episode. Of my current reads, one of them is a TBR Crime book. So I could always feel like I at least had the illusion of progress. I'm not making no progress, but eventually the main priority did become TBR Crime, and because of the number of books in this episode, it really took over my reading life for a minute. Honestly, the last 2 weeks have been mainly reading for this. Now, because each episode can have a wildly varied number of books that I have to read, crunch time sets in at a different time from episode to episode. This one had a bit of a long crunch time in comparison to some other past episodes, not only because there were 16 books, but also because the book choices themselves were hefty. I just have a lot of fantasy on this. I don't know why so many of these are so big. But the good news is that crunch time is not all bad. In fact, I find it really fun to be reading for an episode of TBR Crime, so once I get to fully dedicate my reading attention to it, I'm usually having a blast. And I also like to gamify my reading in this way, not because it gives me negative pressure, but because I find it to be genuinely enjoyable. The littlest bit of pressure, which is good for making progress, but not pressure that's paralyzing or bad in any way. It's just a little motivation. Now is a time for confession, so I'll just tell you one of the weirdest things about the way that I read for an episode of TBR Crime, which is that reading for an episode is not a linear process. And by that I mean I do not in any way read the books in the order of the episode. A great example of this is that the very last book that I finished reading for this episode, just finished my last book, was the very first book that I then review in the video because it was for the very first prompt. Exposing myself a little on that one. My reading order is all over the place. I wish I could say there was a good reason for this, like that Chaostober this year messed up the order that I had to read them in, or that library holds took precedent, but the reality is that this is always how I do it. This is always how my brain works, and I wish I had an explanation of why. Because say I did not finish Donna Left the Building, then I would have a cold case, right? But it would be a cold case starting on the first prompt, even if I read every other book for the episode. It doesn't make sense, but it is what I do, and I'm not sure I will ever change. If you just think about it, when somebody plays a TBR game and they don't review the books in that video, they typically don't read it in the order that the game gave them the books, so neither do I. For this next bit, which I think is the juiciest, most interesting bit of this video, I'm going to need my laptop because we've talked about prioritizing reads compared to other videos. We've talked about the order in which I read books and how weird it is. But what I really want to talk about right now is the reading commitment that it actually takes to produce an episode, specifically this episode, because obviously it's always a big time commitment when you're reading multiple books for one video. It's going to take some time, but this one is obviously particularly outrageous because of the number of prompts that I got. So I don't want to say that this is what a time commitment for TBR Crime always looks like, because it just isn't. But this is an example of what it can look like, because it did for this episode. So basically I track all of my reading on Bookly. That helps me track how much time it takes for me to read a book. And so I took all 16 books from the episode and I added up the times that Bookly says it took me to read those books. In total, the 16 of them added up together equaled 87 hours and 10 minutes of reading, which has me questioning my life choices. Like, I'll just take a second to acknowledge that that's absolutely cuckoo bananas. And the only good thing about that, I guess, is that I got a fairly long video with good watch time out of it. But like 87 hours for one video is a bit diabolical. If you're curious, like I was, that means that the average time that it took to read each book for this episode was 5 hours and 27 minutes. Why did I do this to myself? Like, I chose most of these books. If you think about it, it's on me. And then I also looked at all of my reading time across September and October and calculated which percentage of that time is accounted for by just TBR Crime reading. So those 87 hours and 10 minutes represent 44% of my reading time in the months of September and October. So that's almost half of my reading that went to one singular video. In a typical month, I publish 4 videos. So in a typical 2-month span, that means 8 videos. But I gave almost half of my reading time to just one of them. Now, realistically, based on how long that video was, maybe it's not an actual eighth of my content for the month, because it is on the longer side for my content, but it's still, I would not say 44% of the content that I produced in these 2 months, but it is 44% of my reading. And this also meant that on average, I had to read for just this video project for almost 1.5 hours every day of those 2 months. It's actually like 1.42 hours, so 1 hour 25-ish minutes instead of 1 hour 30 minutes, but still almost 1.5 hours every single day for 2 months just to produce this one video, which is absolutely bonkers. I do just want to include a disclaimer here that, like, I realize this is an insane amount of reading, and what a privilege it is that I have the flexibility in my schedule to make that happen and that I enjoy doing it. I realize that I have a lot of reading time that is unavailable to other people. I live alone. I have very few friends around me. I have lots of alone time, lots of reading time, and I have a very flexible work schedule, even though I will give myself a pat on the back and much needed credit, because in the months of September and October, when I was reading for this episode, I also wrote the entirety of my dissertation proposal. So, like, we cooked in September and October. We made it happen. Regardless, I realize the privilege of my schedule, specifically to give me 87 hours in a 2-month time span to make this one video. The reflection that this is a lot of time for one video is not necessarily negative for me. It is a little what the heck about it, but it's something that I enjoy doing. I don't want to come on here and say it took me 87 hours to read for this one video and I'm mad about it, because I'm not. Like, I thought the fact that this episode went off the rails was so fun. And so I had a lot of fun reading for and producing that content. But it is just a reflection of, like, this is how long making content takes, the same way it's insightful and important to notice that when somebody crochets or knits a blanket, it can take hundreds of hours of their time to do so. Just a reflection for myself. This took a while to make. I'm proud of it. I thought it turned out really fun, but like, it was a bit ridiculous. And so if you were curious when you watched my episode, like, how long did this actually take? That's how long. 2 months, 16 books, 87 hours, 1 me. That's what it actually takes to make an episode of TBR Crime. It's chaotic. There's some fun pressure associated with it. At the end of the day, though, it's a piece of content that I love making and want to continue making, which is why I do. If I hated giving this amount of time to a project or had no fun playing it, I wouldn't do it. So anyway, if you haven't caught up on that episode yet, make sure you check it out, although I don't know why you would be here right now if you hadn't watched it. So if you're here right now, go ahead and drop some type of crime-related emoji down in the comments to show your love of TBR Crime. And also, if you have any more questions about my process, whether about TBR Crime specifically or balancing all my content, please go ahead and leave them down below and I'll answer as many of them as I can. And if there's any specific behind-the-scenes content you want to see in the future, also let me know that. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content and many more episodes of TBR Crime. And until next time, bye humans, bye!